What's going on, City Students? Here we are again, another week. Hope you guys are doing good. Hope everybody's still safe. If you're just now joining us, you are catching the very last part of our series, Drawing Near to God. If you've been with us for the last couple weeks, let's just recap kind of where we've been and what's bringing us to this last final piece. We talked about first, before the quarantine hit, on what it looked like for the disciples when Jesus called them into relationship with him. They were in the boat and they heard Jesus' voice from the shore, and they had to make a decision like, hey, am I going to get off the boat and follow Jesus, or am I going to stay here and kind of abandon my livelihood, abandon my comforts, and abandon the things that I know to follow Jesus wherever he takes me? And so we kind of started off talking about that and just drawing similarities in our life on how when we feel that tug from Jesus, making that step to say, okay, I don't know exactly where Jesus is taking me, but he's pulling at my heart, trying to get my attention to spend more time with him and take my life on a course of who knows where, right? And then we kind of transitioned from there, and we talked about drawing near to God, and we talked about James 4 and 8, where the scripture promises us if we draw near to God, then God will draw near to us. And we had that conversation for the first week on just simply asking ourselves, okay, do I currently draw near to God? Or maybe I'm hearing a lot about God, but I'm not drawing near to God. And then after that, we kind of talked about what it would look like to draw near to God in prayer, and slowly developing a lifestyle where prayer becomes a consistent thing that we're practicing. And then we transitioned from prayer to talk about drawing near to God in the Word, and what would happen if we never drew near to God in the Word, and kind of living our lives getting secondhand information versus getting firsthand information, where we draw near to God for ourselves and hear what the Bible has to say and give God an opportunity to teach us as we draw near to him in the Word. And so our last piece of drawing near to God, we're going to talk about drawing near to God in worship. And for some of us, we're like, okay, that's easy. You know, you throw a song on and we do worship every Sunday, right? The guy's on the guitar and he's singing some stuff, and that's our worship, which is true. But we kind of want to talk a little bit more about some scriptures and what worship might look like with our life. If you haven't heard this before, I'm going to give you this quote. Worship is a lifestyle. Okay, and that's something that I remember hearing as a younger person, but not really paying it much attention and not really even thinking about what that means. Worship is a lifestyle. But we're going to talk about that. And so as we go through, I want you to just kind of stay tuned and, get dialed in as we talk about drawing near to God in worship for this last portion of our series. So I got a scripture for you guys. Let's talk about the scripture. And if you have a Bible, you can open it up. If you don't, it'll probably be on the screen, so you'll be all right either way. Anyways, it's from Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. So check this out. It says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, and this is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So maybe not all of that will be on the screen because it's kind of a lot right there. But let's talk about that first part right here where it says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, to, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. So it's kind of good timing because Easter was literally less than a week ago. But Easter is obviously like an important day that we celebrate because it has to do with the resurrection of Jesus after he was crucified. And when I think of worship, I think of the resurrection as kind of the centerpiece and the crux of why we worship, and the center and the crux of what initiates our worship, right? When we're thinking about drawing near to God in worship, there's usually something in you that compels you to worship. And so when we have an understanding of what Jesus did by living a perfect life, by dying and being crucified and then resurrecting, that's kind of what I want to encourage you to keep anchored in your heart as you think about why drawing near to God in worship, right? Because for some of us, we might think like, well, let's see, we're in quarantine, so we're not really going to church. And we might be thinking like, my only time of worship is normally on Sunday mornings when the band is going hard, and maybe I'll listen to some worship music and kind of get in the feels, so to speak. Well, this scripture is also talking about like, hey man, like our pure worship, the worship that God desires is from our life, from our lifestyle. So regardless if that means on Sunday or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, really what I want to kind of share is the act of worship is us having a moment where we reverence God while simultaneously making sure we're keeping him at the highest priority in our heart and in our life. Because when we push God to the highest priority in our life, then everything that we say and everything that we do flows from him being at the highest priority in our life. So when we draw near in worship, I want to challenge you this week, find a couple of songs, and maybe for a short amount of time each day, you draw near to God in a practical way by putting on some music, and instead of just getting in your feels, right, while the music is playing, let the lyrics talk to you, but also assess your heart and allow God to assess your heart and make sure that you're pushing God to the highest part into our lives, right? Because there's sometimes where we'll be going about our days, going about our life, and we get drawn into certain things, and next thing you know, our priorities get out of whack. And then when we wake up in the morning, the first thing that we pursue is something that takes our attention and distracts us for almost the rest of the day, right? And then next thing you know, that becomes what we run to and what we pursue and what grabs hold of our heart for that day, possibly for the next day, possibly for the next day. And next thing you know, our lens is kind of jaded and kind of blurry. So when we think about drawing near to God in worship, it doesn't have to be anything super spectacularly deep. It's just a moment. It could be with music or without music, but a moment where we're allowing ourselves to reverence God with humility and assessing our hearts, like I said, and asking ourselves, Lord, is my heart having you at the top priority and the number one pursuit of my life? Because from there, Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2 will come into fruition in our life, right? When we say, you know what, I just realized that I am pursuing this above God. I am kind of having a pursuit and this as a number one priority. So when we think back over the course of our lessons of getting pulled off the boat, of establishing a life of prayer, of seeking God in the scriptures, this last piece of worship kind of like puts everything together. Because as we draw near to God in prayer and we get sensitive to his presence, right, then that becomes something that we desire a little bit more. Like, oh man, like I've heard people say even over this last quarantine that they've been reading more because as they're reading, they're actually sensing more of God's presence. So it's caused them to want to read some more, right? And then as we learn what the scripture says, it gives us reason to worship, right? And like I said, coming out of Easter, it gives us a moment to reflect like, man, like Jesus rose from the dead. He died. Why? For our forgiveness, because we're not perfect. We need that. We need that forgiveness, right? Because he loves us, right? Because he has a plan for our life, right? Because he doesn't want us to live in hurt, harm, danger, all those things that kind of keep us down and oppressed. Jesus died that we can have life and have life abundantly, so we can walk hand in hand with him, and that he can bring love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control, all those fruits of the Spirit. So I want to leave you with that thought for this week of drawing near to God. I have a song I'm going to give you guys. Yesterday when we did, when I was on Instagram Live, you guys gave some really good feedback on some of your favorite worship songs. I agree with all those that you posted. But there's this one I want to leave you guys with. It's called Beautiful Exchange by Hillsong. Fire. Okay? Put that song on. It's a really long song, so it gives you a lot of time to just kind of sit and reflect. But again, as this week goes on, find a little bit of time each day, and I want you to draw near to God in worship. Let some lyrics of some worship music speak to your heart and allow God to dig deep into your heart, surface things, and allow God to rise to the number one priority in your heart if He's not already. But just have that time of reverence and just appreciation and being humble before Him. So like I said, guys, that's our closing teaching on drawing near to God. I want you guys to stay tuned. We have a special guest coming next week. I won't tell you who it is. But someone else will be here next week. Until then, guys, again, stay safe. Stay connected to your small group leaders. And join us tonight at 6:30 for Name That Tune, Jams and Jesus.